listening to the GM Shuffle with Michael Lombardi, presented by DraftKings and VSiN.
The Thanksgiving edition of the GM Shuffle. The big guy Michael Lombardi. From all of us here at the GM Shuffle, we say happy Thanksgiving. A triple header with Chicago at Detroit right now, between 9.5 and 10.5 with Detroit. The wagon laying it. Of course, the middle game, the Giants at Dallas. We'll have more on Dallas coming up. 3.5 with Dallas laying it. Miami, Green Bay nightcap on your Thanksgiving. 3.5 with Green Bay laying it, hosting the Fish. Michael Lombardi, happy Thanksgiving. How are we feeling?
We're good, Patrick. How are you? How are you feeling? What will be on your menu there? Are you going to be watching? I know you're going to watch the first one, obviously. That's your team. But at nightcap, I mean, you're sitting there, Hermosa Beach. It's not going to be dark. You got the stars in the water. I mean, it may not feel like Thanksgiving, but I'm sure you got something good planned.
We've got some family in town, so we're going to have Thanksgiving with the crew. Of course, we'll be a few cocktails deep by the time Miami and Green Bay gets going. Now, this is the one thing I will say to you as a Detroit Lions fan. Outside of the 10 years with Barry Sanders, we were always embarrassed that our team was nationally presented on Thanksgiving. But this year, it feels different because I think universally, you would agree, everybody's saying Detroit is the best team in football right now.
No question. And, look, we know that Dan Campbell hasn't been great against the spread on Thanksgiving Day, but his team now is a different kind of team. And I think it brings the one thing I always loved, that everybody complained about the Lions being on Thanksgiving Day. I never did, because I think there's such great tradition and great history. And there, as you know, growing up a Michigan fan, there's so many great Detroit fans there. They're just an incredible group. And I felt like it was a great honor to have those fans honored with the Thanksgiving Day game. Even though the quality of football, from Wayne Fonts to some of the other schmoes that they've had in there, wasn't as good as we hoped it would be. But I really believe that the pageantry and the tradition, like, I think Green Bay for the night game, it couldn't be better, because there's nothing a better venue than Lambeau Field. To have that as a night drop, I think Green Bay should have a Thanksgiving Day game. If they're good and they have Jordan Love, they should have it all the time at home, because I think that field lends itself, as you said, we'll be drinking, everybody will be eating turkey sandwiches, and what better view to have than that field with all the history on it. So I loved it. And I think Detroit, I think we're finally recognizing, at least this generation, how great Michigan fans are, how Lion fans have suffered for so long. And now, they're a passionate fan base. They would sell out even though the game was going to be shitty. I think it's tremendous. I really do.
Yeah, and part of it, look, the NFL is an American tradition, and so is the Ford family and Ford Motor Company. And a lot of that, there's synergy there with the Ford family getting the Thanksgiving game, 70 plus years ago, and the tradition continues. So we'll get to the games coming up here in just a bit. Of course, the GM Shuffle presented by Smirnoff. We do game days. Please drink responsibly. The Smirnoff Company, New York, New York. And we should start with the breaking news. As the Giants and Jets spiral, we've got news on both of them, including the fact that Daniel Jones is going to sign with the Minnesota Vikings. So what was your first reaction hearing about Jones to the Vikings?
Well, when I saw that Kevin O'Connell was really going out of his way to praise Daniel Jones, you knew he was interested in him. And I think they're a little bit of a concern here. I think you can never have enough quarterbacks, right? But let's break down their roster for a second, right? They have they have Sam Darnold on a 1-year contract, okay? And now they have J.J. McCarthy, who they used a first-round pick on, who's had a second knee surgery. So we don't know where that is. And Nick Mullins, your backup, and Brett Rippon's your third string, and you're carrying Rippon on the roster. It's an easy trade out to trade Daniel Jones for Brett Rippon. And Darnold's going to have a backup that's at least qualified to go in the game. I think it was a smart move by Minnesota. I really do. And I think it was a smarter move by Daniel Jones, because I think what Daniel Jones has learned, which is what I've been saying in the National Football League for years, is very few people can coach the quarterback, and even fewer can evaluate him. And go into a team where he's going to get coached by a guy who likes him, who sees talent in him, who can project him forward. I think that was a smart decision. I think if he'd have gone to San Francisco, it would have been a smart decision. I think he would have been able there, but I think Minnesota now puts themselves in a position where they could evaluate Daniel Jones for 7 weeks. Do we want to sign him? Can we sign him to a good deal as a backup? We could still bring McCarthy back, see how he handles his knee. We're not obligated to sign Sam Darnold to a contract because of the injury to McCarthy. I think it really is a smart play by them. I think you should draft a quarterback every year in every single draft, and I think you should keep adding to your quarterback talent pool, because if you end up like San Francisco, who's got Brandon Allen coming in, or Joshua Dobbs, you're just not good enough and your team falls apart. Look at Miami. I mean, Miami put nothing into their backup quarterback and they got nothing out of it.
Yeah, no, it's a great point. I think it's a little bit of chess here by the Vikings, because I think you mentioned McCarthy, second surgery. There were kind of rumors that he had gained weight, obviously, because he's not mobile right now. But that was the first round pick. And all of a sudden, you've got Darnold on the 1-year deal, 27 years old for Daniel Jones. I think this is a really keen move by the Vikings.
Yeah, and look, one thing about the Giants giving Daniel Jones $160 million, he's not financially worried any longer. His life has been set. In fact, his next generation's life is set based on the money he's made, if he invests it wisely, which I'm sure a kid from Duke will do that. So this is about reestablishing your career. This is about putting yourself in a position to enhance your career. And you've got to go with somebody, whether it's McVay, Shanahan, O'Connell. You got to go with somebody who will coach you and who's a head coach and who understands it. And I think this really, if he goes to Minnesota and plays well, then it's going to verify John Mara, and it's going to tell all Giant fans that they keep hiring the wrong person to lead their team. I don't see how that could happen, but stranger things. Look at Baker Mayfield. I mean, Baker Mayfield went to Carolina. He couldn't complete a pass. I mean, it was embarrassing, and Carolina had Baker Mayfield and Sam Darnold on their team. Think about that. They had both of them on the team at the same time, and they couldn't get anything out of either one of them to the level that they needed to. Now, they brought Baker in late. They never really had a chance to develop. Sam was starting to play better for them, but of course, naturally, the owner made all those changes. Could you imagine if Carolina kept Matt Rule, they kept Baker Mayfield, where would they be today?
Right.
They would have all those draft picks, right? Even if they say they kept Sam Darnold over Baker Mayfield. I mean, they were trying to do the right thing. But again, it comes back to who's developing the quarterback. What's the plan for the quarterback? See, O'Connell and Shanahan and McVay, those guys have really good plans for the quarterback. But there's no developmental plan. You could see it in New York. There never has been one. I mean, I've been seeing on Instagram all these clips from a Hard Knocks. I mean, I don't know how John Mara tolerates it. Like, he's sitting there and he's talking about how we have to protect Daniel Jones, and 10 games into the year, they cut him and they never protected him. Like, if that was the whole offseason agenda and you didn't even accomplish that.
Yeah, I saw a clip come up from Mara. Everything optically about that Hard Knocks was bad. And I'm not picking on Joe Shane, but he just did not seem competent. And then Mara almost dejected the way he was sitting with his feet up, and he was just like, I can't believe we're getting rid of Barkley. Now, think about it. You fast forward, Jones, their first-round pick, who they gave $1 billion to, and Barkley is in the MVP conversation in Philly. Like, to me, Shane and Dayball, it'd be fascinating if Mara just doesn't clean house.
See, the problem with the Giants is there's no alignment between acquisition of the player and player development. There's none of this, how do we develop the player? And it's not how do we coach the player, it's how do we build the system of offense around the player? What do we do when it comes to that? And I think ultimately that's the biggest fundamental question that's never answered. So even if John Mara cleans house, okay, let's talk the Jets. They just hired Tannenbaum and Rick Spielman. Now, here's what I would say to you on that. If Tannenbaum and Spielman are really doing their job well, they got to tell Woody, forget who, we could put 1,000 names on this list. Unless you change what you do, unless you let them run a program, unless you tell them what kind of football team you want, unless you tell them how to build, this is what you want to see in 3 years, and give them benchmarks, then it doesn't matter who we hire. Because it's just randomly. You got to be demanding and say, hey, I want to build a team, a big physical football team that values offensive and defense. I'm going to borrow Jeffrey Lurie's blueprint. And I'm going to do this, okay? Go to work, guys. You got 3 years to put it in place. And if in 3 years, if I don't have a great line, a great defensive line, and a good quarterback, you're all gone. I got it. We're on to it. We got an identity now. But if they just sit there and start interviewing candidates and kiss Woody's ass and make him think that he's not the problem, I don't give a shit who they hire. They could bring Charlie Munger back and let him help them with the search. It ain't gonna work.
Yeah, so the news, Mike Tannenbaum, speaking of Hard Knocks, remember we saw Tannenbaum and Rex Ryan back in the day with the Jets on Hard Knocks. So Tannenbaum and Rick Spielman have been brought in. I guess they're a part of the 33rd team to help with the GM search there for the Jets. So kind of weird, a little awkward, but I guess this
is what this will be an Alexander Haig thing? Well, no, that's not Alexander Haig. Do you think this will be a Dick Cheney thing? You think it'll be a Dick Cheney thing? So when Dick Cheney got hired by George W. Bush to pick the vice president, and you know who Dick Cheney picked, don't you? Dick Cheney.
Who's that?
Okay. Yeah, right? That's who he picked. I mean, they hired Dick Cheney to vet the vice presidential candidates, and who ended up being the vice president? Dick Cheney. So, could Spielman or Tannenbaum end up vetting themselves and become the hell of it? Why not? Why not?
The pride of Wyoming, William Cheney.
Wyoming.
Well, how about that?
There we go.
Yeah. So Tannenbaum and it does feel like, didn't Spielman aid the Commanders as well? So he's been used in this capacity.
Yeah, it's amazing how he's done it. I don't know how much Rick knows about leadership, how much Rick knows about what goes into building all that. It'd be fascinating to see, to give Tannenbaum credit. He started this 33rd team, he built that into this. So, he's got some kind of idea, but I mean, I don't know how guys they got to be tight with the league office, I would assume, because Woody and Mike are still probably tight. There's that connection, but it's interesting how you get those jobs, right? When the job's really about leadership. I mean, I wrote a book on it. Ain't nobody's calling me to help them pick their coach. I can tell you that.
GM Shuffle, a very special Thanksgiving edition. When we come back, are the Cowboys thinking playoffs? And is Mike McCarthy coming back? Playoffs? We're back. GM Shuffle.
You're listening to the GM Shuffle with Michael Lombardi, presented by DraftKings and VSiN.
Happy Thanksgiving. We'll get to the 3 games on tap today as you get your turkey, your stuffing, a little green bean casserole. Why not? Okay, so Dallas 4-7, Michael Lombardi. I mean, I guess, there's a chance. So you're saying there's a chance. So the Cowboys, an improbable win in Washington's got people feeling good, including Jerry, was talking on his little radio show there in Dallas. And they brought up McCarthy, and he said, look, I don't think it's crazy at all that Mike McCarthy's coming back. He's been an outstanding coach, maybe a 70% chance. I did think about this when I heard that quote from Jerry. You've kind of been on this theme that this year is not about McCarthy. And last year, they overachieved. So maybe not a shock for you to hear the fact that McCarthy could potentially come back for the Cowboys?
Well, I mean, if you listen to the whole thing with Jerry's on the show, basically Jerry's not blaming the coach for not coaching well. In fact, he defends the coach. He uses Troy Aikman to say, Troy even says the guy's doing a good job coaching. And in fairness to Mike, he's been dealt a bad hand by Jerry. They've got no running back. Their offensive line's starting 2 rookies. They're not quite, Zach Martin's not the same player. They lost all their depth to Washington. I mean, we all knew it coming. It's really, this is a design problem, not a production problem. So, and then you add in the fact that, you and I both know, I mean, I got a 98-year-old father who, stays in a home. And, if you try to get him to leave that home just to go out and get a cup of coffee or take him to breakfast, he's like rattled for the day. Old people don't like change, right? They just don't like it. And I think Jerry doesn't really want to change. I think he could offer Mike a 2-year contract extension and Mike would take it, which is no big deal. He could, I'm sure he's got Mike Zimmer for another year. He can roll this again because Jerry doesn't really care about what you think. Jerry cares about his system of development, right? So they've got Stephen Jones running the player personnel along with Will McClay. They run a collaboration of what they do. So, the coaches are heavily involved. in all personnel. They can be involved as much as they want to be involved. And so Will McClay kind of has to serve three masters, Jerry, Steven, and then the coaching staff. And he does a good job of navigating that tough terrain because somebody's going to be unhappy. But I think what they try to do is build a collaborative effort. That's what they really want more than anything. And look, I think if for Jerry to change, that's uncomfortable because now he's got to teach the new guy how they do business in Dallas. This is how we do business here. Like the new guy's not coming in saying, I do business. Mike Vrabel's, okay, if that's how you want to do business, fine. But, now you got to learn about what Vrabel likes. Now you got to learn about what he wants to do. That's a hard thing for old people to do, And I think if Jerry fires Mike, he's basically firing the wrong guy. He should fire himself. The team's shitty, right? Owners don't fire themselves. So I think it's highly probable that not because of finances, because of comfort. I think it's highly probable that Mike comes back. I don't see it as a far outreach. The other thing I think he did by saying what he said was he then told the players, you better keep playing hard because this guy could be coming back, right? And if the players felt like the substitute teachers in the building, now if they go out and lose to Tommy DeVito 40-7, Mike's not coming back. But I think if what Jerry did was a smart thing on his head because it makes the players hold accountability to themselves for the remainder of the season. He knows he's not going to the playoffs. He knows that. But listening to his voice and listening to what he said tells me I don't like change, and I can't blame the coach all for this mess.
It's a good corollary. Man, happy Thanksgiving to the barber, Mr. Lombardi, there hanging out.
Yeah.
He's cutting hair at the home. Well, you mentioned they're not making the postseason. 4 wins, a win in Washington. They are laying 3.5 on Thanksgiving, and DeVito may not give it a go. He said his whole entire body is sore, so we could have a Drew Lock game here with the Cowboys favored.
I think if it's Drew Lock, I might be inclined to take the 3.5 against Dallas because Cooper Rush isn't no right home about either, right? I mean, so I think this is a hard game for both teams to move the football. I know last week the Cowboys went over their total, but they can't run the ball. Now, look, here are the Giants, right? They have 1 interception. They have supposedly this great pass rushing defensive line. They've created 1 interception all year, right? I mean, they don't turn the ball over. They're 32nd in the league. Do you remember in Hard Knocks? Here's another thing about Hard Knocks that has to come back out. Do you remember the scene in Hard Knocks where Brian Daboll and Joe Shane were sitting in there and they were talking about who they're going to hire for their defensive coordinator? And Brian saw the stats of Tennessee's defense and they said, oh, that's it. Let's hire Bo. If you give me these numbers, we're going to hire. They're 32nd in the league in yards per attempt rush allowed. I mean, that was so bad. That's not how you hire a defensive coordinator. And then what drove me insane was when they went to Bone and said, well, what do you like? How do you want to play your defense? What do you I give a shit about how the Giants should be playing defense the way they want to play defense. It's not the way Shane Bowen wants to come in and play defense. I mean, the fact is they're the number 2 team in the league and seeing the least amount of passing attempts against them because people just run the ball on them. I mean, anytime they wanted to run the ball, Tampa Bay ran the ball effectively. Now, Dallas can't run the ball, which makes this game even. And without DeVito, I didn't think DeVito would play this week. Now, if he plays, he's tough. He got the shit kicked out of him, Patrick. He got the shit kicked out of him. I don't fault the guy at all for what happened to him. Would you want to play behind Evan Neal? I mean, if I was Tommy DeVito's dad, I'm like, can you get Evan Neal out of the game, please? Because I don't want my son playing behind him. Because you would be better off be putting a Coke machine over there. At least you couldn't bull rush the Coke machine.
So the Jets, it's interesting as the Jets continue to try to find a general manager. Are they going to be looking for a quarterback? Who's in better shape going into 25? The Giants or the Jets? Who knows? But we do know Aaron Rodgers at this point said, quote, I don't even know if I want to play yet, but New York would be my first option. Rodgers said, I think it was with your buddy McAfee. Look, do the Jets want him? Would the new GM and coach want him? And now he's saying he doesn't even know if he wants it. But if he does, it's going to be the Jets. What a mess.
Well, when you're thinking about retirement, you probably are retired, right? I mean, I think that's pretty much the case, right? So I think that's pretty much the case. For me, I think to me it's too early for him. And I take him for his word, what he said on McAfee yesterday, because Look, I don't think he's made up his mind. He doesn't know the situation. Who's going to be the offensive coach? Who's going to be the head coach? Who's going to be the general manager? Like, again, for Rodgers, look, when he was in position with Woody and Joe Douglas, this is what he wanted. He dictated to Dave Dunn. He told Dave Dunn, his agent, this is what I want, and they did it. They did it. Nathaniel Hackett's the offensive coordinator. Well, now that love affair is over. That honeymoon's ended. So I think until all these pieces get put in place, I don't think anybody's going to sit there and say Rodgers is coming back. If I got hired as the GM, would you want Rodgers back? No. You're going to have to go say that. You're going to have to say, Aaron, look, you can come back. We owe you $35 million on an option bonus, but we're going to draft a quarterback. We're going to play somebody. We're going to draft somebody to start over again. We have to. We're forced to. I think that's the only way. You got to be honest with them and tell them the truth. Like, look, we got to get on with this. We need a quarterback for the future. We gave it our run, but we don't have anybody now, unless they think that, the kid they drafted last year, Jordan Travis, who was hurt, unless they think he can come back and miraculously lead this team. I wouldn't bet on that. I wouldn't bet on that.
Yeah, in betting, it's called hedging. It almost feels like Rodgers is hedging a little bit, saying, yeah, I don't know if I want to play, because he's not going to know if he's wanted by the new regime. At this point, Rodgers no longer gets to handpick, whether it be his offensive coordinator, fire Saleh, or, he didn't decide to follow. Well, we know what happened. Anyway, and it does appear that he's not going to get shut down. So the interim head coach there, I can never say his name, Ulbrich, said that there's no discussion.
Just call him the Brick Man.
We know we can call him not the coach of the Jets next year, so doesn't really matter. But on Sunday against the Seahawks, it looks like Rodgers is going to play. They're not going to shut him down.
That line opened up with the Jets as favored. Can you imagine that? I mean,
they've been favored.
How does this happen?
Nonstop this year.
How is that? Why would anybody think that? I mean, I know the game's at home. I get that. So it's a home game, but not like the Jets have played great at home anyway. So now the line's up to Seattle -2, which, maybe you want to do that. I don't know. Seattle played really good defense last week. So they stopped James Conner from running the football. So I don't know if that's an easy play either. I would be reluctant with that. But to me, again, I want to go back to what I said about Tannenbaum and Spielman. If they really are earning a paycheck for this, they got to tell Woody, they have to be loyal to Woody. They shouldn't be devoted because he's getting a paycheck. Devoted people tell you what you want to hear. Loyal people tell you what you need to hear. And they need to go in there and say, Woody, here's your problem with your organization. You have a horrible structure. You're too corporate. You need to hire somebody to come in and give you an identity, and you need to tell them what the identity is. Very simple. We want to build this kind of team. Now, here's what we don't want. I don't want any player on the team who has domestic violence. Okay, gone. Take them off the board. I don't want them. I don't want any player that does this. Okay, take them off the board. You set the ground rules. You set the macro level ground rules, and then let us go out and execute the plan and give us 3 years to build the kind of team you want. If we miss on first-round offensive linemen and you want a good line, that's our fault. But you got to give the person the authority. You got to give the head coach so that we can have a coordinated player development program. See, here's what I think one of the missing elements of this whole thing is. When you hire one of these play callers, when you hire a strategist, right, you're not hiring a leader. You lose out on player development. Because if do you think Saleh walked into the offensive line coach and said, look, I want to play this guy, and I want to keep coaching them? Like, somebody has to be the player personnel element of the coaching staff. I walk into the room, we got to keep playing this guy. The coaches are going to bitch and hate it. But as Walsh would say, anytime the coaching staff's happy, we're probably not a good team. You got to drive the coaches to develop the players. But if you have a head coach who's got his head buried in his play sheet, who's not going to do that, that's part of the organizational structure. That's part of the structure that we have. And if you can't demand that, if you can't get that, they're just going to collect their paycheck and they're going to go on. And whoever they hire in 3 years from now, they'll be hiring somebody else.
All right, that's the Jets. I hopped on a Bears podcast with a friend, and he said he believes that if the Bears get blown out on Thanksgiving in Detroit, that Flus is going to be gone. So does Poles do the McCaskies? They've never done this, where I don't believe they've ever fired a coach. During the season, the Chicago Bears, a proud franchise, will come back and discuss Matt Eberflus the Bears, and of course, our first one up on Thanksgiving, the Lions hosting Chicago. We continue GM Shuffle.
You're listening to the GM Shuffle with Michael Lombardi, presented by DraftKings and VSiN.
Okay, happy Thanksgiving, GM Shuffle, the big guy Michael Lombardi, Elliot producing. We're happy to have you here. Of course, great football on a family day. And speaking of families, the McCaskey family there in Chicago. So I was thinking about this. I don't believe maybe Trestman was the one coach they even blew out. They didn't blow him out in season, but they cut him before his contract ran up. But this has been a loyal ownership group. And Eberflus. So Eberflus, we mentioned, taking on the Lions on Thanksgiving, and it's a big number, anywhere between 9.5, 10.5, with the Lions laying it as they should be. It's almost like with that Hail Mary in Washington, that changed. Just the trajectory of the Bears has everything's gotten ugly there. Do you think there's a chance that Eberflus, if he were to get blown out, is out, or do you think he gets the full season here?
I think he gets the full season. I don't look. They lost a tough one to Green Bay, right? They lose another tough one to Minnesota in overtime. The team hasn't quit. The team isn't good enough. I think he has to pay a price for that in year 3 of his program. Just like I think when you go back and look, John Fox was, after 3 years, John Fox didn't win anything for that team, so they have to change. They went 4 years with Nagy, and the only reason he got 4 years because his first year he went 12-4, and then after that he went 8-8, 8-8, and 6-11. And then now we've got Eberflus. Trestman got 2 years, right? He was 8-8 and 5-11, and they got rid of Trestman and they got rid of the general manager and they made a bunch of changes. So I think, to me, the last time, last year, Peter King reported when he was still writing, he reported that going into the Washington game, I think it was on Thursday night, they thought that if Eberflus lost that game, he would get fired. Well, they won that game. They went on to win 7 games and they kind of brought his team back, but he's 3-14, 7-10, and he's 4-7. And I think, to me, the biggest issue that I see with his team, and I've said this for all year, is they're not good enough in the defensive line to run the scheme they run. They just aren't good enough. And Eberflus has no diversity whatsoever into it. When you can let quarterbacks throw at a 70% completion, it's a little bit, it's like, I've worked for a lot of interesting people, to say the least, right? And so one of the people that I worked for was a guy by the name of Bud Carson, who was the head coach of the Cleveland Browns. He had no business being a head coach whatsoever. He was a crusty old, but he was a really good defensive coordinator, right? And he knew the game. He invented cover 2, really. He was the architect of cover 2. But he was so good at being able to, devise defenses and attack people. But he used to say this all the time. He used to say, when you were talking about it, he would say, any team that spots drop with no matches underneath and just lets the quarterback throw the ball without rerouting the receivers, without jamming the receivers. He said this it goes back to 1982. He said, in this league, if you watch the quarterback, which is a zone team watching the quarterbacks, and not challenge the receivers and contest passes, you will watch them complete 1 million passes. And that's what teams do against the Bears. That's because that's what they do. So for me, I think more of Eberflus. I think there's no reason to fire him now, but I certainly think at the end of the year, they have to reconsider where they are. But this goes into Poles not understanding that if you want Eberflus to be successful, you better put all your resources in defensive linemen.
And offensive line. Poles did Eberflus no favors in the offseason.
You know what's funny, Patrick? They put no resource in offensive line. Do you know why their field goal team sucks? Because they have no power in their offensive line. So those guys that play on the field goal protection team, they get fucking pushed back. It's not Eberflus's fault or the special teams coach. They're soft up front. And that's Poles. That's on Poles. All those block punts are on Poles. They have no physicality at all in their team. It shows up on that. When you can't protect for the field goal kicker with your offensive line and people are running through Larry Broom and all the guys that are running through, that's on you. That's a personnel issue. That isn't a scheme issue. See, this is the biggest problem. Like when we start talking about firing coaches, who's doing the diagnostic testing on why the coach should be fired and not? See, I think, to me, if I were at the Cowboys, I would agree with Jerry not firing McCarthy because I don't think it's McCarthy's fault. McCarthy made Dak play better than he ever played before in his life. Now, would I rather have Bill Belichick than Mike McCarthy? Absolutely. There's no question. But to me, this isn't on Mike. The team's shitty. The team's shitty. It's not good enough. No running back. Same thing with Chicago. You're trying to go to the playoffs. You got no offensive line. You hired a bad offensive coordinator who nobody thought you should have hired, but that's on Eberflus. He may have to pay for that. But then you got no physicality with your team. It's like the Bengals. If you think the Bengals are going to become a good team as long as you keep Zach Taylor as the head coach, you're crazy because they have no toughness. You're just not going to invent toughness. You're just not going to invent it. So, somebody's got to come in and coach it. And if the guy doesn't do that, how do you keep keeping him?
Conversely, I think you would agree the Lions are tough on both their offensive and defensive fronts. The Hutchinson goes down, they get better unthinkably up front defensively. Offensively, they bully everybody. I don't think it's hyperbole. I've been saying this before the season started. I think this could be the greatest offense I've ever seen. And they're getting better play by play, week by week. The Lions right now, toughness, culture, explosiveness. It's as good as it gets. And they're going to be highlighted on Thanksgiving.
I love it. And I love the fact they're under center quite a bit. I love the fact that they run an old school offense. They're not all these RPOs. They're not trying to run one back. They get in, they have a fullback, they got a blocking, they put Skipper over to be the blocking tight end. Everybody wants to praise the Lions for their offense, but they're an old school offense. They really are. They're an old school offense.
They come off the run nonstop.
Run the ball. They know what they're doing. They're trying to be who they are. They're not trying to be what everybody. If I got to watch one more 3rd and inches out of shotgun and try to get I'm going to lose my mind. Like the Ravens the other night, they got into 4th and 1, boom, they run the power, there goes Henry off the side. Like at some point you can't keep doing when everybody's zigging, you got to zag. So I'm with you. I think it's a great offense. I think that he coached tough, right? He coached tough. He coached with love, but he coached with toughness. The players like playing for him, and give Brad Holmes credit. They brought players in that adhere to what they want to do, right? See, this goes back to the Jets. That's what Woody has to do. I want you as my new GM. I want highly competitive people that love football. That's what I want. And that's what I want. That's your job.
But what's fascinating too is when we watch this game, Chicago had David Montgomery. Now, Gibbs, because of the explosiveness, he gets the attention. This Montgomery is special.
It's great.
He is watching every snap. He is so good, the running back. And Chicago, just let him go.
And let him walk. Again, I think the biggest problem in Chicago is Poles. I think Eberflus is bad. I think he needs help too. But Poles is too young to help Eberflus. This is the biggest problem. Poles is too young to help Eberflus. And so there's nobody helping Eberflus become a better head coach. I get all these guys who get fired from head coaching jobs. They call me. My son said, Mickey just said to Dad, you're the head coach who got fired whisper. Because I guess they read Gridiron Genius and they come and what do I have to do? Well, the problem is it's too late. You should call somebody to help you become a head coach. See, that's Eberflus's problem. You hire Matt Eberflus, who's never had head coaching experience, and who's helping him become a head coach? Dan Campbell had Parcells. He had Sean Payton. Parcells is helping Campbell. Don't miss. I'm not taking anything away from what Dan did, but Campbell's smart enough to call the guy, right? These guys hire him. Poles is barely can do his job. How the hell is he going to do that job? It's like Shane Steichen. I think, Chris Ballard's trying to let Steichen become a head coach. Steichen needs help. They need help. If you're going to continue to go down the defensive road that the Colts do, then they all believe it must be really good because you're either coaching it or allowing it to happen. Again, it goes right back to what Bud Carson said. If you don't jam the receivers or reroute them, they're going to be 70% completion. I think the Colts are worst in the league against percentage of completion. But this has been going on for 3 years. Somebody's got to help the coach.
Gridiron Genius, hey, coaches, if you have some time this offseason, Football Done Right is out too. So make sure you check that out. Okay, so Thanksgiving, of course, Giants, Cowboys, middle game. We've got the Dolphins and Packers coming up as well. All of a sudden, the Packers, 8-3, Michael. It's 3.5. They're laying it against the Dolphins here.
Well, we know Tua in under 40-degree weather, not very good, right? We know that. But I think, to me, this Dolphin team, now, last week was the start of usually when Mike McDaniel's teams take a tide. Over the last 7 games of the year, his first 2 years in the league, he's 4-10. Now, he won last week, so now he's 5-10 over those. Now we've got 15 games, okay? But, I mean, I think this is going to be interesting because this offense that we love, they're 26th in the lead in 2-minute scoring. So as good and dynamic as they are, they haven't been. Where I have a problem with Miami is they have no toughness too. I mean, they have strictly, I mean, you can just see when you listen to the disc jockey on the sideline spinning records, he never spins a defensive record. Never. He never spins a defense. I mean, this is his third defense coordinator in 3 years. They're 25th in the league in converting third and short, right? They're 31st in the league in converting 3rd and 1. They're the worst team in the National Football League in converting 4th downs in general. Right? So now you could say, well, that was because Tua wasn't in the game. No. I mean, the last 8 games, which has had Tua in them, they're 31st in the league in big plays, 20 plays or more. I think people have caught up to it. Now, it's going to be interesting how Green Bay handles it, but I think Robert Saleh will be an interesting factor in this game because he's going to help, and we'll continue this after the break. He's got to help the Packers, who typically don't play the Miami Dolphins, don't really study this offense, to understand what you have to do to take it away. Having Saleh on the staff really will help Jeff Hafley, will help them understand how the best approach is to take on this Miami offense.
Okay, that's Dolphins, Packers. We do have not just sales on Black Friday, but we've got the Raiders and Chiefs. The Raiders are a discount.
I got to read you a text. Wait till I come back. Breaking news when we come back.
We got breaking news, GM Shuffle. I think it might have something to do with the Raiders when we come back on Black Friday. Happy Thanksgiving, GM Shuffle.
You're listening to the GM Shuffle with Michael Lombardi, presented by DraftKings and VSiN.
Happy Thanksgiving. Welcome back to the GM Shuffle, presented by Smirnoff. We do game days. Please drink responsibly. The Smirnoff Company, New York, New York. We'll get to our DraftKings bet highlight. He's Michael Lombardi. I'm Patrick Meagher. To you and your families, happy Thanksgiving. We've got great football on tap. I don't know if it's great, but we do have a Black Friday gear coming up as well. With the Chiefs hosting the Raiders. Now, the tease of all time was Michael Lombardi going to the break. Of course, the Raiders are in disarray with your buddy Antonio Pierce. I'm on the edge of my seat. You've been receiving some text messages, maybe about AP there in Las Vegas. What's going on?
Well, look, let me just, for full disclosure, look, I am not upset that AP fired my son. He's in a better place. So I'm not. And for full disclosure, it pains me to watch how bad the Raiders have become. Look, again, I've said this oftentimes on the pod. I think Josh McDaniels didn't do a good enough job there. I think he should have had more time, but the players revolted on him because the players ultimately run the organization. They listen to, the owner listens to them, which is one of the biggest sins you could have as an owner, right? And so my criticism of Pierce is not personal. It's strictly professional, Sonny. It's strictly about what I've watched him over the years, right? And so when I did a little research on him, I made the comment a couple of weeks ago how he wasn't even he had Long Beach Poly as one of the most storied franchises, high schools in the state of California. They always win. Great play. Deshaun Jackson. They've had great players from that school for years, right? It's just been a mountain of resources and a winning program. But when Antonio Pierce was the head coach, they were bad. So it's funny. So I said about how bad he was, right? And so on Twitter, I got a direct message from somebody, and again, this is all verified, so I'm not going to dispel the name. But so I've got this. So this comes into me on Monday at 3:02. Michael, I've reffed high school football in Southern California for over 30 years. I had a playoff game between Long Beach Poly and Chaminade. Long Beach Poly's sidelines, complete mess. Team, completely disorganized. Ton of talent. And then he capitalized the word completely. Boat race by Chaminade. Outcoached everything. We were all, assuming all his buddies, we were all laughing our asses off that the Raiders hired that guy. What do you say to that? I mean, like, that's true. Like, these guys are refereeing games. They watch this guy coach. Like, who can defend that? Like, they're laughing at Mark Davis for this. They laughed at him. Here you are, you own $1 billion franchise, and meanwhile, you can't even hire a guy, and meanwhile, you have Jim Harbaugh out there. You have Jim Harbaugh out there who wants to coach for the Raiders, right? And he's not making, like, the Chargers didn't overpay him, right? Here's the thing that's funny. The Chargers got duped in staying in Los Angeles, and they lost a fortune. If they would have moved to Las Vegas, they would be one of the wealthiest teams in the league. But they got duped. The league made them stay. The Raiders went from being a broke franchise, thanks to the most powerful man in the NFL, and he moves them to Las Vegas, Mark Bedane. And Mark Bedane ends up making Mark Davis a multi-billionaire because of that move to Las Vegas. And they did it all. If there's ever a book to be written, it should be how the Raiders became billionaires off that, right? And so here you are, you've got all this money, you've just fired them. Now you're listening to Max Crosby and Devontae Adams, who you now traded, to hire a guy that the high school coaching officials bureau down there in Southern California thinks it was a joke, and they're laughing at you. They're laughing at you. They're not laughing at me. I didn't write this. They're laughing at you, Mark. And at some point, you have to be like at some point, this has got to matter. Like, this has got to matter. So Thanksgiving Day, remember this offseason, how we listened to how, he was going to just, they got Patrick Mahomes' secret number. Give me a break, please. Give me a break.
I guess we'll see on Black. It's funny.
Your reaction to that. Let me hear your reaction.
Let me say this. Having lived in Los Angeles, the high school football here, people don't really, you think Georgia, you think Florida, you think Texas. It's incredible here. And Poly is as good as it gets. The idea that a ref would write you, and now one of 32 franchises being run by the dude that couldn't run a high school. The Davis situation is fascinating because Davis, Mark Davis, he's Al's son. He wants to be cool with Max Crosby and Devontae Adams. He got put in a weird spot. They passed up on Bisaccia when Bisaccia was the interim and did a good job. And then they take Pierce, and now it's a mess. It's a legit mess. They're going to have to pay him to go away. They're already paying McDaniels. It's a mess.
Right. It's a mess. And the guy that made him all this, Mark Bedane, who made him all this money, that poor guy, he fired him over some administrative issue, or he left because of some administrative issue. And then the guy that replaced him, Dan Ventrelli, he got fired. Ventrelli was the reason they hired Josh McDaniels. And so, like, all they keep doing is changing things out. They just keep changing one after another. But you can't get any worse. Like, again, this goes back to the original conversation. Ken Herock was helping Mark Davis, okay? Now, again, he's devoted to Mark Davis because he get a paycheck, so he's not telling him what he wants to hear. Everybody in that coaching search knew Antonio Pierce was a disaster. They all knew it, right? He's got off-the-field issues in terms of that whole thing down in Arizona State, going through some personal issues, all that stuff, okay? But they won't tell Mark. Like, see, I got fired because I told Al Davis, if you hire Art Shell, this will be a disaster of epic proportion. I was being loyal to him. They can make up any other reason why I got fired, which they'll do, which is bullshit. I went home that day and I told Millie, I said, look, if Art Shell wins, which is never going to happen, we'll stay here forever because he'll rub it in my face. But if he loses, we're gone. If he loses, we're gone. We're getting fired.
Because you told him.
Right? Because I told him the truth. I was loyal to him. I was being very loyal to him. And people say, well, Lombardi's not a loyal. No, I'm going to tell you the truth. You just don't want to hear it, right? That's why I don't get phone calls to help out the Jets, even though I've written a book about it, just like those other guys do, because I'm going to tell Woody the truth. Are they going to tell Woody the truth? That's what I want to know. Are they going to tell Woody the truth about what he wants to hear? Because what good is a consulting firm if you're not willing to tell the truth? What good is your job as a consultant if you're willing to sit there and just shake your head and say yes? Like, and then here's the biggest problem I have with these consulting firms is they leave the coach alone. They don't even help him after he's there.
It's pretty simple. If you're one of 32 and you have a head coach, you ask yourself, if we fire him today, is he scooped up by one of the other 31 franchises? Antonio Pierce wouldn't be an assistant coach, let alone be scooped up as a head coach. So, you don't have a head coach. You have to move on.
You got to, I mean, like, seriously, like, like the Raiders, are they a talented team? No. Okay. I get that. But they could be better if they had a better head coach. They've gotten worse on defense. Like, if that's your area of expertise and you're getting worse, then that's on you. That's on you. Like, tell me if you're sitting in a room and I mean, like, I couldn't even interview Antonio Pierce. Like, it would be embarrassing. Like, it would be, he's full of it.
It's also a reminder that improbably you had them. You had on Monday night, you had the Ravens at the Chargers. Great game, fun game to watch. But the Ravens are obviously legit. Somehow, was it week 2? The Raiders went to Baltimore and beat them, and have only gotten worse. Obviously,
right.
They've gotten worse every week, and that's institutional. It's just the team spiraling.
Yeah, I mean, everybody gets lucky in the early of the season. I think Baltimore's going to regret that loss all year because they had the game won in the fourth quarter and they let it slip away. I mean, that was when we saw their fourth quarter fall apart. And I think they took them lightly. They had a big lead and they lost it. And so they lose 26-23. But, look, it was all in the fourth quarter too. I think Gardner Minshew made every play in the fourth quarter that he had to make. But that's what happens earlier in the year, but it shouldn't happen again. I mean, look, let's face it, it shouldn't happen again. But where are they going? They're going to get the first, it's either them or the Giants. One thing about our holiday special weekend, we're going to figure out who could have the first pick. We're going to watch two teams auditioning for the first pick overall. The dysfunctional New York Football Giants, and of course, the continuation of dysfunction of the Raiders. See, I think it's fascinating how Raider fans get all pissed off at me saying I'm a Raider hater. Like, give me 5 reasons why the Raiders should be loved. Like, when in the last 20 years since we were there in 2002, we went to the Super Bowl. Give me 5 reasons why you believe in the franchise. Don't tell me the Gruden years were good. I mean, you went to the wild card in 16 with Del Rio, right? The next year you come back and you go 6-10. You hire Gruden, right? And he goes 4-12. He goes 7-9. He's 8-8. Then they fall apart. But Bisaccia goes 10-7. They go to the playoffs. They've been in the playoffs twice, right? They've been in the playoffs twice. They haven't finished higher than second since 2000, since we won it in 2002. They've been third, fourth, or second. They haven't even come close to finishing first in the West. Like, where does all this Raider love come from? Like, where does it come from? Like, why are you mad at me for telling you the truth?
It's a mess. And happy Thanksgiving. It's time for our DraftKings bet highlights. We talked about the Chargers, Michael. They're going to be at the Falcons, and it's 1.5, and you're going to lay it with the Chargers on a bounce back here.
Yeah, I think so. Everybody said, well, it's a short week. Falcons have a home game. They're coming off a bye week. They really need the game. All those things are true, but I think this December 1st is what this game will be played. December's about mental toughness. Who's physically and mentally tough? And every time I watch the Atlanta Falcons play a mentally and physically tough team, they fold. Pittsburgh beats them. The Denver Broncos beat them, right? I think, to me, look, I think the other thing is Jesse Minter's defense got run the ball on. I think they'll fix that. I think they'll play better because that game's a little closer than the 7-point score. I think if Quentin Johnson catches a couple passes, that could go the Chargers' way. And I think Jim will do a good job of getting his team ready. I really do.
All right. The theme, the Bears-Lions. The Lions, hopefully that continues the wagon that is Detroit. The Giants, will it be DeVito against the Cowboys, and Dolphins-Packers? Anything else? As far as those three, anything you're looking forward to with the 3 games?
I just love this weekend, and I'm thankful for everybody who listens to the GM Shuffle. I'm thankful for people who send me messages. I appreciate it. I appreciate all that goes into this, Elliot, you, because I'm thankful to have you on this podcast. It's really made my life a lot better having you back here and doing this with you. So I think it's really a time for thanks.
Same to you, big guy. We're thankful as well. Thank you for paying attention and listening, downloading the GM Shuffle. Happy Thanksgiving. See you next time.